It's a good name. Don't remember? What? Fika. Okay, right. But the Fika is, the F is about our belief, is about, okay, it's about belief, and then the I is about the importance or the significance, and then the C is about the community, and A is how do we address it, okay? And those are the tools in spiritual assessment, we call. Now today, having knowing the theology of it, having knowing that we are called as caregivers, and then we have now the tools how to communicate through knowing the spiritual assessment that we have, that we will use to be able to communicate what we want for the elderly to understand. Now we can integrate. Now this is the important things. We want to build up the confidence of the caregivers in integrating spiritual care, because most of the problems, the rationale of this program is they cannot do spiritual integration to their elderly because they lack confidence and they lack knowledge. And that is why today, after taking all those modules, we now want you to be confident enough as caregivers that you can tell the word, I am a caregiver. I am proud. I am a caregiver. You see? Because caregiver is a ministry and it is a calling, right? So, our speaker this afternoon is an ordained pastor of the United Church of America based in Canada. And he is involved in daycare. He's involved in hospice or whatever institutions that he has. Now he has been lecturing about the subject, and he is known for this, to minister to the end of life people. Because he speaks it by himself. He's been in this ministry for quite some time, and he is well known. He will introduce himself later on. But he got a cancer, and that is why while he was sick, cancer, he would continue to develop this thing, and because he experienced it he himself. Last October or last September, I think he died, but then his teachings still remains. And so this afternoon, we will be witnessing what we call his this module entitled, okay, palliative care, communication for the soul. The title is Communication for the Soul, then how to integrate spiritual care in long-term care. Okay? So, let's begin.
Tonight's session, you'll see on your screen, Communication for the Soul, how to integrate spiritual care into long-term care. And what we're talking about tonight isn't, of course, just for long-term care, but we're going to be looking at issues of spirituality, and especially how you can apply them in your particular context. So to introduce myself, my name is Grant Dillenbeck. I am a presently retired minister from the United Church of Canada, but I had served 37 years in active ministry in several congregations in Alberta and Ontario. And during those years of ministry, I spent lots of time in hospitals as on-call chaplain. I spent a summer as a student chaplain in a psychiatric hospital. I did training in what's called clinical pastoral education. That's counseling, particularly for those who might go into chaplaincy. I've sat on committees within long-term care facilities and residence councils dealing with spirituality and palliative care. I've also had family members in retirement residences and long-term care. So I come to this not as an academic expert. I'm not a professor of anything anywhere, but rather with my own personal experience in ministry and in life and in all of the various contexts that I've found myself, and how I, as a community spiritual care provider, have sought to integrate spiritual care into those contexts. So that's a little bit about me and a very brief introduction to the evening. But there are 4 areas that I hope that we're going to cover tonight. So in our time together, the first thing that we will do is identify and reflect on personal concepts and attitudes regarding spirituality. A lot of this will come from you. What are your concepts about spirituality? But we will also draw upon other sources for what is spirituality. The second step will be to understand the spiritual needs of residents and their families in the environments and contexts in which we work. And then the third step will be then to put those first 2 together. What is your role as a caregiver in supporting the spiritual support and care of people with whom you work? And yes, you have a role, even though you may think, well, we leave that to the expert. And we all have a role, and we will definitely get into that. And then the last will be to respond appropriately to residents' spiritual needs. So we'll get some really concrete ways in which you will be able to engage the people with whom you work on the issues of spiritual care. So those are the 4 broad strokes that we will cover tonight in our time together. As I say, we're starting with our own sense of spirituality. And to do that, we're going to have a little bit of an exercise to kind of center ourselves spiritually. And this exercise is called the STOP exercise. So the first thing that we do is stop. We've probably all had very busy days with lots going on. You may be thinking of all the things you've done and have to do before you go to bed tonight. Lots going on in your mind and in your heart. So just to stop and to put that on hold. And to help you stop, take a deep breath. In fact, I'm going to say take 2 or 3 deep breaths right now to help you stop. So after the stop and the T, the take a deep breath, the O is to observe. So as you've stopped and as you've been breathing, you might observe some of the things that are occupying your thoughts, occupying your emotions, occupying your sense of well-being. And this isn't a time to kind of think about all of them, but rather to recognize they're there. And if at some point you find yourself through the evening going back to some of these thoughts and feelings of the day, maybe make a note to yourself so that you can move past it and not let it keep coming back. Oh, I can't forget to do that. I can't forget to do that. I can't forget to kind of to observe it, but to then let it go. And then that brings us to the pause, to pause from the day, to pause from the mental chatter, to pause from all the activity. And then once we've taken that pause and that break, then to proceed mindfully. That is to stay focused on this time together, on this conversation, on these issues. Those other things will be there, and we can come back to them when you are done in the evening, but to take a break from them. And so it's cultivating this sense of, as the slide says, intimacy with the present moment, to be fully present, to be fully here, to be fully aware. And sometimes when we come into this presence, especially on this topic tonight of spirituality, you might find yourself thinking of people in your own life, people with whom you work, people who are on your heart right now. And it's okay to bring them along, but to help them with this conversation, not to distract from it. So I'm going to invite, I should have said that another claim to fame that I should say is that my spouse is Ruth Richardson, who's sitting here beside me, and many of you have met Ruth in many contexts. Here's Ruth. And I'm going to invite Ruth to take a candle. It's an artificial candle, so don't worry, we're not going to burn ourselves down. But it looks real, and she's going to set it back over my shoulder here as a reminder that as we gather tonight, there's that sense of presence among us, of our light shining on each other, of the light of those who are in our thoughts and hearts. And so as we've done this stop, I'm going to invite us again to stop, take a breath, observe, pause, to proceed mindfully, to take 2 more deep breaths. All right, so let us proceed mindfully with our first topic for the night. And that's to identify and reflect upon personal concepts and attitudes regarding spirituality. These are our own concepts, but as I say, I will be offering some other definitions as well. All right, so people are already putting in the answers to that question about what words come to mind when you hear the word spirituality. And these are your words that are coming up on the screen right now. And you can take a look and see that the bigger ones are the ones that more people have put in, and the smaller ones are maybe individual or fewer people. But you'll see all of those words coming in. So faith, peace, religion, beliefs, connection, nature, God, hope, soul, out-of-the-box thinking, spirits within, insight, friends, energy, goddess, grounding, and faithist, droit de droit, lots of input, yoga, inner, insight, all around us. Great.
Wonderful. Yeah, we're it just keeps building. We got 120
and it will keep
already.
building, and it would build all night if we let it. We're going to do more of these tonight, so you'll have more opportunities. But the ones you'll see in the middle, faith, religion, God, soul, beliefs, love, peaceful, we're going to be definitely dealing with a lot of those things. And there are a lot of diverse things out of that. Some are very specific, like Christ. Some are much more less specific, like openness and goodness and that sort of thing. All right, so that's a sense of your words for spirituality. The Canadian Hospice Palliative Care Association has a definition for spirituality. This isn't the one and only or the best. It's a definition that relates to those working in palliative care. Some of these words are pretty big, and I'm going to talk about that. But an existential construct, inclusive in all ways in which the person makes meaning and organizes his/her sense of self around a personal set of beliefs, values, relationships. So existential, that has to do with our existence, our being, our living. We're here. What does it mean? And it's inclusive of all of those areas that give us meaning and help us to organize our sense of self in our lives, that give us beliefs and values and that sense of relationship. So spirituality helps us to give that sense of meaning and purpose and value, and also that sense of connectedness. The same definition goes on to say this sometimes is understood as transcendence or inspiration. So transcendence has to do with beyond ourselves. What is out there somewhere, whether it's people, the world, nature, the divine, but it takes us out of ourselves. And then it adds involvement with a community of faith or practice may or may not be a part of a person's spirituality. So inspiration is a word which literally means to breathe in, to inspire, to take something in that gives you life. But there's also potentially at least a community component. There's a personal component, an inner component, and an outer component. I recently read a book by Christian Wyman. It's about book's about 10 years old. It was on the Washington Post bestseller list. And he's a poet who went through a cancer diagnosis and treatment. And he said that it really gave him a different spiritual focus. He wasn't particularly a religious person. He had had a religious background, but had moved away from it. But this diagnosis, the title of the book is My Bright Abyss. He went deep in this abyss, but it was out of the abyss that something happened. And what he said is that out of that challenge, he had said that spirituality is that burn of being that drives us out of ourselves. I love the way he put that burn of being that drives us out of ourselves. It takes us beyond what is the average, every ordinary, every day. He also says it's an aperture or a lens through which we see our moments of mystery, of crisis, of revelation more clearly. And then he's speaking from very personal experience, there can be a great inner growth and strength in what seems from the outside like pure agony or destruction. And so sometimes it's in those moments that it seems that the tunnel is darkest that there's a light at the end. And for many people, spirituality is a component of that. So spirituality, for tonight's context, is that which is of a more personal nature. But we also, and as we saw in the word cloud earlier, religion is definitely related to that. So we're going to do another one of these Mentimeter word clouds. What words come to mind when you hear the word religion? So we're going to do another word cloud, religion. Some of you may have the same word, some of you may have different words. It'll be very interesting to see your responses to this
one. And so you can just go back to the browser that you did the previous quiz on, and it should just pop up for you, this question there.
So we're getting words like tradition, faith, dogma, collective, confining, restriction, Christian, Jewish, devotee, paternalistic, bias, judgment, spirituality. So some of the words are the same, and some of them are different. And I think that often depends on the context in which we have experienced religion, that sometimes people have had a very negative encounter or know of other people who have. But there is this, I think, growing sense in a lot of these words that it's not just the personal inner stuff of spirituality, but there is a corporate sense. There is this tradition. There is this sense of community. There is this sense of outside of ourselves. And so for tonight, we'll be keeping those two thoughts in mind. It's not a clear delineation. This is spirituality. This is religion. One is bad, one is good, one is helpful, one is not. They kind of all flow into each other, and people's experience of religion and or spirituality will influence the words, the concepts, the thoughts that they bring to it. And that's true for ourselves, but keep in mind, it's probably also true for the people with whom we will be in relationship when we are working. So if it helps for tonight, a definition of religion might be a system of beliefs, values, and practices which a person holds in common with an identifiable group. So spirituality is probably in most cases more personal. People create their own sense of spirituality and what helps their spirituality. Whereas a religious connection is that sense of community, that sense of tradition, that sense of ritual, that sense of a belief structure, which can be confining. And many people certainly have found they've had negative experiences. But I think it's also true that most spiritual practices probably came from a religious tradition at some time, whether it's meditation from Buddhism or yoga from Hinduism, or whether it's prayer from various contexts, or even connection with nature from some of the Wiccan religion. So a lot of times what we do for spirituality is rooted in a religion, and how we make those connections between the two for ourselves and others can be useful. So at its best, and again, I'm borrowing this from that Christian Wyman book, that a community with whom we have a soul connection can be one of our greatest sources of support. Yes, it can sometimes be unhelpful, but especially when people are facing physical, psychological, spiritual, emotional pain. Christian Wyman in his book said that when he experienced it, he said, pain, it islands you, it separates you, it isolates you. And that having a community, a soul connection community, can be helpful. Not just family, not just friends, those are great, but to have a community with whom you can wrestle with these deeper issues can be very significant, both for you and for others. So the last thing I put there, religion, reconnection. Some people who study words, etymologists they call them, not entomologists, that's bugs, etymology, say that the word religion probably comes from two words which mean to reconnect. And so at its best, religion should reconnect us to others, to our deeper self, to the divine, to nature, to make those connections. And we'll see a slide about that more fully in a moment. But sometimes people find it hard to get their head around the concept of spirituality or of religion, let alone to try and talk to somebody about it. So here's a little way in which might help you to think about it for yourself and then maybe for others. So you might ask the question, what lifts your spirits? So that's different than saying, what do you do to help yourself grow spiritually? Or what do you do in your religious life? But what lifts your spirits? So answer that question out. What lifts your spirits? So we've got music, animals, friends, making a difference, friends again, residents, music, canoeing. Hey, that's a big one for me. Bonding, walking along the river. So this is presenting in a little bit of a different way than the ones did before. But we see there are many ways in which we all do things that help to lift our spirits. And we all have a spiritual life. That's the first comment for the evening. We all have the spiritual life. What do we do to lift our spirits? And so before we can do anything in our work environment or for anything else, we need to focus on lifting our own spirits, taking care of ourselves. And that may involve spiritual practices, it may involve religious practices, but what do we do to lift our spirits? So I mentioned that a lot of it is about communion and connection. And this is from Dr. Harvey Chechenoff, who actually, Ruth was telling me, was speaking here last fall. Some of you may have seen him. And he really focuses on bringing humanity and dignity into the healthcare system. And so he created this little model that spirituality is about connection, connection of the person with a higher being, a higher power, spirit, faith, hope, whatever. Communion with others, that's a connection of love. And again, that may be a community of faith, a community of that soul care. Communion with nature and that sense of inspiration from being in a place of beauty or even art. And communion with the self, taking ourselves to that deeper sense of identity and wholeness and inner peace. So this whole umbrella of spirituality and religion is about connection to our deeper self, to the world around us and the people around us, to something beyond ourselves, that transcendence, to something that is in the earth around us, but also beyond us. And all of those can help us grow in our spiritual life. And I see somebody wrote their prayer. So this is a little exercise. We all do something that is of a spiritual nature, but we may do different things. So what I'm going to do, I want you to take your hands and clasp them together like this. And when you do, you will notice that one little finger will be on the bottom and one thumb will be on the top. Now, I have my left thumb on top, but when we do this exercise, it's usually almost half and half. Some people have their left thumb on top, but some have their right. So whatever thumb you have on top, try and switch your hand so that the other thumb is on top and the other little finger is down below. Now, most people find that very uncomfortable, very difficult, very awkward, and they say, why would anyone do it that way? It feels so weird. And yet probably about half of the people are doing it that way that feels strange for you. So you may encounter people who have spiritual practices or a faith that you think is very strange. But if it works for them and isn't causing any harm or any conflict or any disruption, if it works for them, it's important to try and support it and to remember, okay, they just clasp their spiritual hands. When they pray like this, not like this. Another quick one, take your arms and fold them like that. Now
you see the signs there, right? You can identify some of the signs there, right? So about the cross, the Jewish sign there, then those are all signs of Christianity, something like that. And that's why whenever you see that speaks about spirituality. So that means even if people don't know what spirituality is, when they see that kind of images, they can relate. Oh, that star there with the crescent, what is that? Huh? The star with crescent, you know that? That's Muslim, right? Okay, that's Mohammedanism, okay? And then, of course, Christianity, and then that five thing there are Jewish, right? So all of this that speaks of spirituality. Continue, Jack.
usually people will have one hand on top of an arm and one hand underneath. Again, usually it's about half and half. So take your arms and try and fold them the other way. That one people find really hard. How do you do that? And again, it's a reminder that we all do what works for us. It may be from our background, it may be genetic, it may be experience, it may be what we've exposed to, it may be our nationality, it may be our language. And it's important not to bring our own biases, but to recognize that if people have a system that works for them, a spirituality that works for them, our role is not to change it or to impose ours, but to support theirs. So, we all have a spirituality. And knowledge of a life-threatening illness can either challenge or enhance or do both to a person's religious and spiritual well-being. And we heard that from that book from Christian Wyman, My Bright Abyss. It's an abyss, but it brought a sense of brightness.
That's the world of everyone, and we are not supposed to change it. This is the problem of presenting spirituality to some people. Because in the healthcare system, in the chaplaincy thing, that when you go there, you do not turn around his world. You do not turn around his religion. And as Christians, that is one main problem that we have. Because when we want spirituality, we want him to know what we believe in. And this is why caregivers should be able to draw between the lines. When your residents are Christians, you have no problem. You can present whatever you want. You can pray, you can, But when your residents are Jewish, Judaism, or Hindus, or whatever, you try to work it by interdisciplinary, by connecting it to their pastor or to their imam or to their rabbis, because it's the rabbis that will work with their spirituality, but you are there to guide her. But if he is a Christian, you have no problem. If he is a Christian or she is a Christian, then you are there as a pastor, as a counselor, or whatever. That's the thing that we need to learn as caregivers. Because when we try to encroach, try to, have you seen a house that is full of fence? When you try to open the gate without asking permission, you will be in hot water. Some caregivers are like that. That's why they said, tomorrow, please don't report. And then you will ask, why? I have no check already. No, because he doesn't want you, because you want, he will tell his son, he tries to convert me. He tries to, of course, if they are. But we need to know, but you are there as a caregiver to guide him here. If he is a Christian, but if the Holy Spirit tells you with all due respect, present the gospel. Present the gospel. And this is our problem with chaplaincy. And some Christian chaplains are having this problem, but it is a rule. It is a rule in the healthcare system that when you assist some people, especially when they are in the health system thing, you do not impose your own. But if necessary, like he's got no other way to do it, you present before he dies. That's our thing. Right, Jack, continue.
So, we've come to the end of section 1. What is our sense of spirituality and religion? And we've realized that when people are facing a life-threatening or life-limiting illness or some kind of big challenge in their life, it may cause them to reflect on their spiritual and religious life in a positive way or maybe even a negative way, but people may be more open to addressing that spiritual life. So the second step for tonight is to understand the spiritual needs of residents and their patients, of patients and their families, I say, residents. So everything we just talked about that applies to you applies to the people with whom you will be working. They have spiritual lives. They may have a religious context. They may have had a religious upbringing. They may be wrestling with spiritual issues in the face of the challenges that are in their life. And so how can we be open to that? How can we help them to face their time of loss, their time of fear, their uncertainty, their sense of loss of independence? All of these huge challenges can shake that sense of inner identity to the core. And for many people, that's when a sense of spirituality can be particularly significant. There's a woman named Jean Stairs. Yes, sorry, we're clicking ahead here. Thank you. Who wrote a book called Listening for the Soul. And lots of people have spoken about this in the same kind of way. But there are 4 basic spiritual questions or questions for the soul that many people ask, especially when they're in this life-threatening, life-limiting, challenging time. Who am I? What's my life been all about? What has been the purpose and the meaning? Who gives me my identity? Where are my sense of roots and belonging and my sense of that community? Who will go with me? Who's going to support me on my journey? Family, friends, healthcare professionals, yes, but who else can be there to walk this path? Maybe people who've walked a similar path, maybe other residents. And where am I going? Where am I going in the trajectory of my illness? Where am I going in terms of my care in the residence in which I live? Am I going to need to move again? What happens after I die? Where am I going? So people are dealing with a lot of these deeper questions. And if we think of these 4, it may help us to keep these questions that they may be facing in our thoughts and minds as well, to be listening for their questions, to not answer them right away, but to listen for them. The other thing is that most people do have some kind of religious or spiritual connection. And So here are some stats of Canada from Statistics Canada 2021, hot off the press. When you answered your census a couple of years ago, you're in these figures. So in Canada, you'll see in the far left-hand bottom, the light blue is Christian, the darker
Fast forward a little bit.
is identical. Okay, but they
A little bit. Forward a little bit. Skip that. Yep.
now, as Ruth mentioned,
Yeah.
some people identify as spiritual but not religious, and there's this acronym SBNR, spiritual but not religious. And maybe people who've had a religious connection in the past, but maybe it was negative, maybe it doesn't work for them, maybe they've decided it's of no value, but they may still have spiritual practices that might even come from that tradition, but they don't identify with that tradition. But the reality is that when people are facing challenges in their life, it may be helpful to help them reconnect with a tradition from their past, or to connect with a tradition that they feel a sense of affinity to, even if they may not attend those religious services. So there can be a sense in which helping people to make those connections to a community of faith beyond themselves could be meaningful to them. And I've actually seen there are a fair number of studies out of the United Church where people do ask the question between spiritual and religious. And they ask the question, are you spiritual but not religious? But when they ask the question, are you spiritual and religious? A lot of people say yes. So you can be both. You can be one or the other. You can be neither. And the reality is, when we are dealing with residents and families, it may be the resident is in one place and the family in another, and that may cause issues. But especially with the focus on the resident, it's trying to help them connect with what has been meaningful, what is meaningful, and what will be meaningful. So we're going to do another question here. So this is actually, you get to click on the line across. Spirituality is important for most of the residents in our families, so click on the very far right if you strongly agree, or on the far left if you strongly disagree, or somewhere in the middle, and then you're ahead of me. Religion is important to most of our residents. You can go strongly agree, strongly disagree, or somewhere in the middle. So for your residents, do you think spirituality and or religion are important for your residents? So the leaning is so far that there's a little bit more of a bubble under religion. There's a broader spectrum under spirituality. But the reality is that most people are leaning more toward the agree side than the disagree side. So almost 4 out of 5 would say spirituality is very important, and about 3.5 out of 5 say religion is important. So we're saying that we have a spirituality. We're saying that our residents and their families have a spirituality. And we're saying that it is important for them. So somebody better do something about it, right? Like, who's going to deal with this reality that spirituality and or religion is important to our residents and to their families? So let's go to the next question. Do you think that most residents and families with whom you work are having their spiritual needs met? Strongly agree? Or not, strongly disagree, and that most residents and their families with whom I work have their religious needs met, strongly agree, or strongly disagree, or somewhere in between? So this is not particularly surprising to me, although this is the first time we've used this little Mentimeter model. It's great to be able to get real-time responses from you that these are lower. We've said that spirituality is quite important. Religion is also important, but not as many of those people who felt that it was important say they think that the needs are being met. We're all about in the middle here, about 3, 2.9 or 3. So it's important. They're not quite being met. How are those needs going to be met? How is this going to happen? So guess what? You are going to be a part of this. Now, a lot of people think, well, it's not my role, whatever your particular role.
Number 3, just rest a little, 2 to 3 minutes. Okay, I know some of you are a little bit bored, but before we go to the number 3 sections now, remember we got number 5. Understanding the role of the caregiver. This is very important. A while ago, it says the understanding their spirituality of our residents. We must understand where they come from, because not all people like you. Maybe your residents are Jewish, or maybe residents are, even if he is white, maybe he's from Anglo-Saxon kind of thing, or he is, maybe he came from like Serbia or wherever. You get to know their religion, their spirituality, and at the same time what they believe in. You do not just go like a frog. You know what's a frog? When the frog hears the noise, they jump there. Then unknowingly what he jump is something, a snake that will swallow him up. Let us not like a frog, that we are so impulsive enough, we decide whatever we want to. No. Let's understand the situation of our residents, and that will guide us what to say. Okay? We do not say, are you married? You have to discover if he is married or not, because some people are offended when you ask them. We have kids, you have husband, you've got to discover. And then such time when it is necessary, you can ask. But here in America, it's offensive sometimes to ask, how old are you? And what is your belief? Where is your husband? Where is your wife? It's none of your business. You see, they will tell you, okay? Please do not ask that. How long have you been married? Unless he opened it himself or herself before you ask that, okay? But it is also good, what food do you like to eat? Because I'm going to prepare it for you. That's okay. But, you didn't say, we Filipinos, this is the food that we like. He said, you Filipinos, I'm not a Filipino, okay? I don't want to eat that. Unless he wants to. It's very important. So we understand what he likes, what his dislikes are, what his religion, what is his state of life. Is he a divorcee or what? Let's not ask sometimes offensive questions. And tomorrow he will say, I need another caregiver. Maybe you need to rest. Why? Because he doesn't like your characteristics. Huh? Go home now. Okay? Suzette, I want you to go home. And then Suzette said, why, ma'am? I still want to serve. No, Suzette, I want you to go home. Why? Because he may be hurt of what you're saying. All right? Then she will tell her son, I don't like her. She's an intruder. Yeah, okay? Then Suzette will cry because she's got no work again. You need to really understand what, especially their belief. Very offensive when you tell them, why did you believe this? Why are you not praying? Unless she tells you, tell me how to pray. But do not tell her, you pray this and you pray that. Right? Any question? That's how important it is. You always have the listening ear in order to understand your residents. Number 3 here, understanding the role of the caregiver. Go.
Is that that you may be a person support worker, you may be a nurse, you may be some kind of staff. You stay in your lane, right? I'm here to do my job, and spiritual care isn't a part of it. But the reality is that spiritual care is a part of the role of everyone who is providing care. That if we are spiritual and they are spiritual, then those spiritualities intersect. And so everyone can provide spiritual care. Susan says that. Everyone has spiritual care. Everyone can provide spiritual care. And yes, there are community partners, but I got to tell you, I mean, as a person, as a minister who's gone into long-term care and retirement residences for 37 years, there are going to be less and less people available to do that. And I'm sure many residences are finding that. And my little pet peeve is, well, if you paid somebody, maybe they would do it. But if you want it for free, there are going to be fewer and fewer volunteers to come in and to provide that spiritual care, either professionally or from a volunteer basis. So if somebody's going to do it, a lot of it's going to fall on you and on the other staff. So these residents and families are facing challenges that you are there to address. Sometimes to cure, often to bring relief, and always to provide comfort. And that's the spiritual care component. How do you provide comfort? The definition of palliative care, to comfort, but not necessarily to cure. And that's a definition of spirituality too, that no matter how much care you're providing to bring a cure to their wound or to whatever illness is being addressed, or how much relief that you're providing to some symptoms they may have, you can always provide comfort. You can always provide that kind of spiritual care. So we're going to watch a little video right now. And this video comes actually from Singapore, from an organization called Jerry Care.
Spirituality means different things to different people. Broadly speaking, it is the recognition that there is something greater than oneself, and it is more than religion. It is the seeking of meaning and purpose in things that we value. Everyone has spiritual needs, regardless of commitment to a particular belief. A person's spiritual needs may change when they are diagnosed with a life-limiting illness. Patients may feel a need to mend broken relationships or deal with unfinished business. They may think about the meaning of life more so than at other times. For some, religion may become more important for them. For others, connections with their loved ones or leaving a legacy behind may become a priority for them during this phase of their lives. As shared in our earlier video of assessment of pain, there are 4 types of pain, and one of which is spiritual pain. When palliative patients experience spiritual pain or distress, the realization that life is finite may lead them to question the meaning of life and suffering, feel a sense of disconnection or abandonment, project their anger at God or higher powers, feel despair and helplessness, be afraid to sleep at night for fear that they may not wake up. Oftentimes, spiritual distress may affect the patient's physical and mental health. As a healthcare worker journeying through with palliative patients, providing spiritual care to them has positive effects on their well-being and relationships. Let's follow Sarah, a nurse who provides spiritual care to her patients. Sarah takes time to get to know her patients, knowing what's important to them and being aware when her patient seems to be struggling. Sometimes, a patient may ask questions about life and meaning, which Sarah may not always have the answers to. However, she knows that just being with her patients and listening to them without dismissing their concerns can help them. Some of Sarah's patients may need professional help to address their spiritual needs. It can come in the form of therapy, speaking to a psychologist or social worker, attending religious services, or speaking to a faith leader. For palliative patients, providing spiritual care enables them to deepen their experiences of hope and love, making the last lap of their journey meaningful and fulfilled.
Able to wake up in the morning, right? And so how do you, if you are a stay-in caregiver, Suzette, what do you tell your residents? If you tell you, I am afraid to sleep, I might not be able to wake up tomorrow. What? Just aware? Just be aware? You do not scratch her back or his back and you sleep like a baby? No? Okay. What would you do? You know, yeah, these are all realities, right? When we are there taking care of people that are having needs. Okay, Jack, continue, please.
It on Geri-Care or go back to this video. We're not going to go through it all word for word, but it raised a lot of the same issues that we've already been addressing. That people in life-limiting situations are often in a place where they're searching, where they're looking for that sense of support and care, that their spiritual needs may change. They're looking for meaning in life, for deepened relationships. They're looking for something beyond themselves, and they're facing questions about, you know, fear and anger. And these things can affect them mentally and physically as well as emotionally and spiritually. And so that it's important to be aware of all of these different areas in which their lives are being impacted, and to know that there are ways in which we can address them. Nurse Sarah in the video was just to be present, to listen, and we're going to talk about that a bit more, and to know when to refer and to say, you know, I'm out of my depth here. Maybe there's someone else with whom I can invite this person to have a conversation. But the reality is that when we face suffering in life, and this goes back to that Christian Wyman book again, that it's a state of distress that's associated with events that threaten the intactness of a person. You know, he said it islands you, it threatens that sense of well-being, and is accompanied by a perceived lack of options for coping. Where do I turn? What do I do? How do I get through this? It's individual in its origins and expressions. It's intensely private, but there's also, again, this social component, and that there may be others who can help us to do that. And this is from the Canadian Hospice Palliative Care Association, this slide about suffering. So suffering and spiritual pain are related. We often hear about physical pain. Ouch, that hurt. But spiritual pain can be harder to describe, to identify, to address. But spiritual pain often has to do with those deeper questions. With when we hear some of these questions, it may be something to help us realize that people are in spiritual pain. Why me? Why is this happening to me? I've heard it said that any question starting with the word why has anger behind it. Why me? Why now? Why? What is the meaning of life if this is what's going to happen to me? Ruth and I just watched a show about this police officer who had the most kind of nihilistic, world-denying view that I've ever heard in my life. Like, nothing has any meaning, any value, any purpose, just give up on it all. And sometimes people can face that reality when they're dealing with a serious illness, with physical pain and also spiritual pain. Where is their future, especially dealing with aging? Everything that I thought was about what brought life meaning and vitality and purpose is being taken away as I age. There's a sadness of letting go, which is grief, right? There's a sense of deep grief, a feeling of being disconnected and of abandoned, that sense of being angry at God or at a higher power or at the universe or at fate, or blaming somebody. I got this because my husband smoked, or, I got this because of my job, or I was in a terrible environment. I got it because of bad genes, looking for someone to blame. A feeling of despair and helplessness, and feeling so afraid that they don't even want to sleep in case they don't wake up. So that sense of spiritual pain, and this slide is taken from material from Canadian Virtual Hospice. And again, you can go to Canadian Virtual Hospice and they have other resources as well. But it helps us to be listening for spiritual pain. We're good at listening for physical pain. This may help us to listen for spiritual pain. And sometimes people talk about spiritual pain in different ways. Existential distress, spiritual distress, total pain, soul pain, psycho-existential suffering. These are all big words people have tried to come up with to talk about suffering, that deep sense of spiritual pain that affects us physically, socially, psychologically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. So when people are suffering, it's going to affect them spiritually, and we are there to be able to try and walk with them on that journey of their spiritual suffering. But that's not to say that everybody is in the total depths of despair all the time, right? There's a spectrum between spiritual pain, deep spiritual pain, and spiritual well-being. And some people may feel strongly connected to the people around them, to their community, to their faith. It may provide them great meaning. Or on the opposite end, there may be people who are totally withdrawn, isolated, alone, abandoned, and they have a sense of meaninglessness. Most people are somewhere in between. And we all have good days and bad days when we may be more on one end of that extreme to the other. But as we journey with people, it's important to be listening for those elements that help us to identify their spiritual issues. A sense of guilt, a sense of sadness, talking about death, talking about abandonment and isolation, talking about anger and rage, talking about hope and faith and trust. So again, all of us are on a scale, and every day we're somewhere on that scale ourselves, and every day the people we relate to are on that scale. And it's how we bring our lives together with their lives in a way which provides them a sense of spiritual care and spiritual support. We heard a little bit from Dr. Larry Liebrecht earlier, and he said healing, and that is something different from curing. Healing is to make a person whole, to relieve suffering, and to give the individual a sense of who he or she is as a person. So again, in general, our role is not to fix it. It's not to cure it. It's not to solve all their problems. It's not to answer all their questions, but it's to help relieve that sense of suffering. And we're going to talk about some concrete ways to do that. Many of you have probably seen the slide from Charlie Brown and Lucy, where Lucy was there, offering psychological assistance for 5 cents. It's interesting, in this little slide, it says, long-term care answers 5 cents. The answer, gal or guy, is out. You're not there to answer all the questions. And in fact, people don't usually want to answer questions. They usually are just wanting understanding. And oftentimes when I visit people and people say, what do you think about heaven or hell or guilt or religion or whatever? My first response is to say, what do you think? And then I close my mouth. And sometimes I need to give a long silence, but usually that's, you go back to that stop thing, pause, take a breath. usually they're asking the question.
So it's very important as a caregiver, you are not there, repeat what the speaker said, you are not there to answer all the questions. I mean, it doesn't make your pay less. You're just there to understand what are, things. And if you don't know how to answer, just better close your mouth and say nothing. If you are not going to, or you may even add up to the agony of suffering when you try to answer, which is not, you try to answer because you want them to know that you are something because you have a good pay. No, it's always good to keep our mouth shut, and then that's the best answer we can give to people. We are not there as a fixer, but we are there as a facilitator, as a caregiver, and as a guide. Yes, Jack.
Because they want to talk about it, not because they want you to answer it for them. Even if you're in a role like I am, of a spiritual advisor. Now, I will rarely have people say, "Cut the crap. I do want to hear what you think about it. I don't just want you to turn it back on me all the time." So there are times when you may, at your level of comfort and boundaries, share, but that comes after really listening to the questions and to why they are asking them and what's behind them. So any human being, guess what? That includes you, because you're a human being, can minister in a situation where the ultimate meaning of being is being pursued. So you don't need training. You don't need a degree. You don't need years of experience as a preacher. You don't need to be particularly religious yourself. You don't need to even have a strong sense of your own spirituality. But being a human being, you can be there to be present with them, and that will enable them to have a sense that they are being ministered to, not necessarily by a minister, but that they are feeling that care. So, we've talked about our own understanding of spirituality in our own spiritual and religious lives. We've talked about that the residents and families with whom we work have spiritual and religious lives, and that they may not always being met, as those needs may be being met as fully as we would like. And we talked about how each of us, no matter what our role, can have a part to play in providing spiritual support, spiritual care, spiritual encouragement for the people with whom we work. So now we're coming to step 4. This is the nitty-gritty part.
So let's have a little break. Let's have a little break. If you want to take coffee down, that's okay. Yes. Just a little break, 10 to 15 minutes. And we're almost done. We are number 4, right? Let's have a little break. Yeah. Stretching. If you want to take coffee, you want to take something downstairs, there's still food there, right? Oh, the ice cream. Oh, the lugaw. Is the lugaw there? No lugaw, Johan? Yes, there is a lugaw. There is a arroz caldo. Yeah, please. Let's go down for a while. Let's have arroz caldo. Come on, there is arroz caldo downstairs. Before we go to the next topic, it's a very interesting topic. It's not only the caregivers are learning, but all of us. All of us are learning a lot. Yeah, yes. So let's have arroz caldo downstairs. 5 to 10 minutes. 5 to 10 minutes, guys. Oo. Pwede mo dalon sa babaw, Yes, the lugaw. Uy, ba't nandito ka? Di ba sa taas ka? Oh, come on, Papa. The lugaw-lugaw. Always eat. Because the more we eat our scaldo, the more sleepy we are. That's okay. collect yours, but please don't spill it on the floor. All right? So, Jake, let's continue.
How to respond appropriately to residents and families' spiritual needs. We recognize they have needs. We recognize that they're not always being met. We recognize we can be a part of that. How do we do that? This next slide for me is the core. If there's nothing else you take away from tonight, this slide is important. So pay attention. And you'll know why I say that. Because paying attention is the most important thing you can do. Simon Weil, who was a philosopher, theologian, writer, thinker, mystic from France in the early 1900s, she said, pay attention to what is, no, she said, attention is the only tool of the soul. Attention is the only tool of the soul. So whether that's paying attention to nature, whether that's paying attention to ourselves, whether that's paying attention to our loved ones, our residents, the divine, the first step in any spiritual encounter is paying attention, not thinking ahead. We're always racing ahead to what we're going to say next, what we're going to do next, which room we have to go to next. But if we can pay attention, and it doesn't mean necessarily taking an hour to do it, it's just a focus, to use that stop method we talked about earlier. Stop, take a breath, pause. Anything you can do to help that person know you're paying attention. I've heard it said that people like Mother Teresa and Princess Diana, when they engaged people, the person felt that they were the only person in the world. They paid attention. And so we can pay attention, and listening is a part of that. You're ahead of me. We're going to be doing that in the next slide. Then to pay attention to what's important for the residents. When they seem to be struggling, to pay attention to what that is. When they seem to be having a good day, pay attention to what that is that's giving them a good day. Attending to their spiritual needs can deepen their experience of love and hope. And we do that by paying attention. We so often get distracted. But if we can pay attention, do I need to say it again? Pay attention. So the next slide, and this goes to Susan's comments in the comment section, is about listening. Some of you may have seen this before, the Chinese character for listening. There are several elements to this character. The Chinese have symbols rather than words. So listen with your ears, absolutely. But that, it doesn't stop them. Listen with your eyes. Listen with your heart. And then there's a line there, which means undivided attention. Couldn't say it any better than myself. Thank you, Chinese symbol. It's great. So you listen with your ears, for sure. But you listen with your eyes. You listen with your heart. And you do that, all of it, by paying attention. And so it's listening beyond the words. There's an American author named Ursula Le Guin who said, listening is not a reaction, it's a connection. It's not a reaction. We're not reacting to what they've said. It's a connection. It's listening on a deeper level that helps us connect. And when we do that, that is a spiritual encounter. Paying attention, listening with the soul. That's the name of that book that we heard earlier, and I'm going to mention again before we end. So how do we pay attention? How do we listen? How do we be present? Here are just some thoughts, some random thoughts of guidelines. So we pay attention partly by respecting their perspective. So there's a lot of attention being given, there's that word again, to cultural humility. So to pay attention to where they're coming from, their cultural background, their religious background, their spiritual background, their family background, whatever it might be. So paying attention to not just what's on the surface, but what's underneath. And paying attention helps you to respond to the issues that they present rather than the issues that you have on your checklist. What are they telling you? Pay attention to what they're telling you. Validate. Yes. So you're validating what they're feeling in the moment. You may go in with a certain task you have to do, and you may get to that task, but it's important to pay attention in and through it even before that task, to share your presence and your compassion, to provide support and encouragement, not to impose your own perspective on them or their situation. And I have to say that is a hard one, because I've certainly seen lots of people. I was, as I mentioned, a summer chaplain in a psychiatric hospital, and I would have staff tell me to go and see a patient and convince them of something. And it's like, that's not my job. It's not to convince them that they're crazy, they're having a religious ideation, that they're, what they believe, is not appropriate. No, I'm there to listen to what makes sense for them. And even though it may sound psychotic to me, if it's what helps them hold their world together, I'm not going to disrupt that, at least not until I really understand it and may be able to help them to find resources to deal with it. But it isn't just say, oh, don't talk that way, or, I don't want to hear about it. It's a sense of listening in a way which validates where they're coming from, and that happens by paying attention. So again, you're not there to judge them or to lecture them or even necessarily to understand them. You're there to be present, to listen, to pay attention. So when you go into a room and you think, gee, I heard I need to deal with spiritual issues, maybe I should go in and say, so what are you doing today to boost your spiritual growth? Or what are you doing today that's a religious practice? You may, there are some people who may help that, but this is a great question, and you've already heard it. We've looked at it before. To ask them, what lifts your spirits? They'll tell you what they need for their spiritual life, for their spiritual growth, for their spiritual development. If you ask it in an open-ended way, what lifts your spirits? What gives you that sense of well-being, that sense of hope, that sense of trust, that sense of love, that sense of joy? And they will tell you those things. And if you're listening, if you're paying attention, you can come back to that at other times, and you might be able to help them tap into those things. You might chart it, you might record it, you might have a great memory and memorize it, but ask them the question, what lifts your spirits? Now, there may be a way in which you're dealing with, I suspect a lot of you right now are saying, yeah, but a lot of the people I deal with are not at a cognitive state where they're able to have in-depth conversations. But if you're paying attention, if you're listening with your eyes and your heart, you will be able to see what lifts their spirits. You'll be able to recognize they're having a good day today. I wonder if it has to do with the entertainment we had, the food that they had, the music that's playing, that they had a visitor, that there was a religious service this morning. We can pay attention beyond the words, beyond the verbal conversation, beyond all of that kind of discussion, if we are really listening. So it isn't just about the words and the talk, it's about paying attention to the whole person. But some of you might want to say, yeah, but I want something more concrete than that. And so Harvey Chechenoff, we mentioned him earlier, he developed this framework called SACRED to deal with spiritual and existential matters. So we start with our own self-awareness, to be aware of where we're coming from, what's affecting us in that day, in that moment, what gives us a sense of spiritual growth. And then out of that sense of our own awareness, we should never ask anyone to do something we're not willing to do ourselves. We do it ourselves, and then we seek to assess the patient, to say, okay, what are the things that give them a sense of spiritual growth and development? What are the sources of their religious life and give them a sense of of really enhancing their life spiritually and religiously. And then to be a compassionate presence. We talked about it. We're going to hear about it again. And then if we get to a place where we feel that the person could use even a greater sense of depth of connection, we can refer them for additional to support to psychologists, to social workers, to pastoral care teams, to others. But it's all about the dialogue, listening to their story. So you might have this little card, sacred, self-aware, assess them, be compassionate, refer, and always be in dialogue. Because that little quote says, being listened to is as close to being loved that most people cannot tell the difference. If you're listening, if you're paying attention, they will feel cared for, they will feel loved. There's this little book called I Am Love, a book of compassion. And then it says, I put my hands on my heart and listen, and that is where I find the answer. I have compassion. I act with tenderness. I am love. And you know, you might even do that before you enter into a room. Put your hands over your heart. Take a deep breath and say, I am love. I am compassion. I can act with tenderness. And go in with that attitude. It doesn't take a half an hour preparation. It just takes that brief moment. And then to encounter that person. And that they will have that sense. This is the self-awareness part that you then bring into the relationship. So again, to stop and slow down, we've talked about this. This one is from Pallium, and it says a lot of the same things. But when we take that time ourselves, we are rippling out our own sense of well-being to others, and we can affect the energy in the room. You know what it's like to walk into a room and say, oh, there's a really bad energy here, or really good energy here. And you have that sense that you can have an impact on the room, even if there's a room with just one more person, your ripple can have an impact. So taking that time for yourself is actually helpful for them as well. In some of the training that I've done over the years, there's a phrase that's often used to be a non-anxious presence. A non-anxious presence. Now that means to be fully present. That doesn't mean to avoid them, to run away, to discount them, to dismiss them. You're fully present, but you're not caught up in the anxiety, either their anxiety or your own. Leave your anxiety outside the door and come in and be fully present with them. And that isn't inflicting your anxiety. We need to be very clear about our boundaries here, not to walk in and say, oh, I've had such a terrible day. You know, you won't believe what's happened. That's only increasing their anxiety. We're not there to do that. We're there to have that sense. And would this be the same with dementia? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. If we go in and talking about the negative, that will have a ripple impact. Even though they may not cognitively follow the conversation, they will feel our energy. Mm-hmm. So again, come in with that positive energy. And no matter what happens verbally, if there's that sense that they feel you are there for them, it may be even be take the same amount of time, but get eye to eye with them. It doesn't necessarily mean to take longer. It means to be more focused in the time that you do spend. Mm-hmm. And so, again, the non-judgmental, the being empathetic, to deal with them and their autonomy, all of those kinds of things, that it all has to do with don't get caught up in their anxiety by trying to solve all their problems. I've been ringing the bell all morning and you didn't come. Well, it's because I had this and that and the other thing. We're just increasing the anxiety. We just say, I'm here now. How can I be present for you now? Not to let the anxiety overcome the encounter. Again, it's all about the intention we bring. And if your intention is to rush and to do a task and get it out fast, they will feel that, whatever level of cognition they have. But if you make them feel cared for, loved, respected, listened to, if you just give a smile. And so this little graphic here, I know I can't stop the downpour, but I'll always join you for a walk in the rain. I remember one time dealing with a fellow whose son was dying, and he said, I want you to pray that my son lives. And I said, well, I'm not sure I can pray that prayer, but I can promise you this, that whatever happens, I'll be here. And that seemed to provide him more relief than I thought it would. I thought he'd push back and say, no, I want you to pray that he lives. But he said, oh, thank you. And I did. I walked the path of the son's illness and death and was present with the family through it all. And that presence was all I could offer, but it was enough. It wasn't, I didn't try and do more than I should or could. I didn't try and make false promises. I just tried to be totally present. So we've got another little exercise for you here. I feel comfortable when a resident wants to talk about spiritual religious issues. Yes, no, sometimes not sure. So you can click on one of those and we'll see what people say. Yes, no, sometimes not sure. So we're getting lots of yeses, not too many no's, a few sometimes and not sure. So, and that isn't to say that every encounter you have to have with every resident needs to be deeply spiritual or deeply religious, but that you are open to it and that you can have that sense of walking with them. So it's great that most of you are feeling that sense of comfort. And I'm sure that it's largely as a result of what we talked about tonight. No, I'm just kidding. I'm sure that you've already come to this night with a sense of being aware and responsive, but hopefully this is adding to it. Now, in the time we have left, I want to get a little more specific. I'm not going to go into this in detail. This is another model that can be used that's a more formal assessment tool for spiritual assessment. If your institution is going to go through accreditation, you may want to use this kind of thing. And for those of you who are maybe more directly involved in spiritual care, but I leave it there. And again, it's from the Journal of Palliative Medicine, and you can find this and use it if you'd like. Now think about, in your interactions with people, what are the topics that you talk about most? You might talk about the weather, you might talk about what's for lunch, you might talk about how they're feeling, you might talk about their spiritual care, their physical care. We talk about a lot of topics, and we're going to focus on some right now. Again, this is going back to that Listening for the Soul book, that we probably all tend to talk about the more practical, physical things, and that's all good. But we can move our conversations into a deeper level when we listen for the soul. We can move them into a more spiritual conversation. So this little model, we actually saw it in one of the slides earlier, that we have a physical component, a psychological component, a social component, and a spiritual component. And in person-centered care, which many residences are moving toward, we try and deal with all four. Now, probably for most people, when we are having conversations, we usually start, I think, with the social. And that is a good thing to do because we're trying to build rapport, especially if it's someone we don't know. So we might talk about a bit about our own lives, and we talk about external subjects like the rain or the sports or the news. We're getting to know them. But in that conversation, if we can move toward talking about them and their life, that's moving it in a more spiritual direction. It's getting it away from us and more toward them. And if we talk about their day, their feelings, their hopes, move it away from the weather, then that again is moving it in a more spiritual direction. And if there are ways in which we can take any conversation we're having to a more spiritual depth. So I'm going to skip over this next slide. It was a pretty simple slide anyway. I think it's fairly easy to know when we're talking about social things or spiritual ones, but we're going to skip this part. So let me give some examples of how we would move from social to spiritual. Let's say we're talking about the weather, and maybe it's a sunny day and we can tell that they really like a sunny day. It may lead us to talk about, well, what's your favorite season and why? Well, when I was a child, I grew up on a farm and we loved the summer and playing outside, or we had a cottage and I took my family there. I loved sunny days. It always reminds me of the cottage. Talking about the weather only leaves it in that social category. If we can move it in the direction of connecting them to that conversation, it can help us to get at some of those more spiritual depths in the conversation. Same thing with sports. Oh, I see you like watching the Blue Jays. Is that your favorite team and why? Well, I grew up watching them, or my son played sports and I've always been a fan of this. I can remember as a kid sitting with my dad listening to Foster Hewitt and the Montreal Canadiens. To move them into not just the topic, but what is their story with that topic? What is their connection to it? And that may help you to then, the next time you see them, say, oh, you know, the Blue Jays are doing really well or whatever. That sounds like a social thing, but you know it's tapping into something that has deeper meaning for it. Or maybe a TV show that they like. Well, what types of shows do they like? Why do they like it? What is it that's meaningful out of them? And then maybe we can put them in an environment where they can watch those kinds of shows, those kinds of movies that gave them a sense of meaning and purpose. So it's not about never having a social conversation and always a spiritual one, but even a basic social conversation can open us, when we pay attention and listen, to a conversation that has more spiritual depth and can enable us to provide spiritual care down the road if we've really been listening and paying attention. So again, people talking about religion, they might think if they're talking about a church or a minister or a denomination, well, we had a religious talk, but that's just talking about content. But to talk about their hopes, their dreams, what lifts their spirits, if they have a religious tradition, what was that tradition that made it meaningful? Why was it that minister was so important to them? To again move it past the superficial to something that's in more depth. So here's a few that you can come back to later. So sometimes people think they need to be entertaining. I got to have the joke of the day, and that's okay. But we also want to be ourselves. We want to be truly authentic. I know clergy that think that they have to have this great number of jokes to tell. And I think that what people want more than a good joke is for the person to really be there. Sometimes we try and find comfort by avoidance. They raise a topic and we try and change the topic rather than being showing comfort by accepting. Sometimes even just saying, tell me more. I've never heard you say that before. One of the words that I used to often use when somebody would say something, sometimes I'd just say, oh, really? And then they would say more. So to give them that open-ended way that you are accepting. So again, standing and being in a hurry or sitting down and being there. Filling empty space with words. A lot of ministers are good at that. Or being okay with silence and just a smile or a touch. Again, it doesn't have to be these in-depth conversations. Even people with dementia, they know what a smile is. They know what an act of kindness is. They know what a positive attitude is. Again, moving from being superficial to being authentic, to move from being pleasant to being present. Now, that isn't to say don't be pleasant, but it isn't just about being that smiling face. It's about being truly present, about being helpful and doing things. What can I do for you? Sometimes it isn't about the doing, it's about the being. You've probably all heard that phrase. We are human beings, not human doings. So how do we be that sense of presence. So those are just some little hints of ways you can move from the social to the spiritual, from you to them, from being focused on yourself to focused on their situation, even in nonverbal and non kind of in-depth conversation ways. So earlier is better than later. Generally, when a person comes into a facility, they are going to be at their most alert and aware. And early on, the more you can have those conversations that give you a sense of their spirituality, the better. Because they probably over time are going to, many of them, become less verbal. So start early. But even if they arrive not being very verbal or very cognitively engaged, you can sense what lifts their spirits by paying attention to them. The music, the videos, the guest speakers, the food, whatever it is that seems to make them feel that they are in a better space. And so even when verbal communication is limited, we can listen with our hearts and our souls, goes back to that Chinese character. And it's important for you to know and believe that your presence is enough. You don't need more words. You don't need more education. Those can be helpful, but you don't need them. Your presence is enough. Believe it, understand it, and do it. So, Ruth's doing some typing here. Yeah. To go to the next slide. So we're coming very near the end. So we started with this. Let's take a minute to do it now, just before we close. Stop. We've heard a lot. We've seen a lot. We've engaged a lot. Stop. Take a couple of deep breaths. Observe your thoughts and feelings. What are you thinking and feeling right now? Pause. And ponder with intention the two thoughts that are listed here below. What's one thing that you will do to care for yourself spiritually in the days to come, to lift your spirits? Because if you don't start with yourself, you're not going to be very helpful to others. So what's one thing you're going to do to lift your spirits? And then secondly, what's one thing that you will do to care for your residents and families spiritually, to lift their spirits? You might even want to write that down. One thing for you, one thing for them. And now the last P, the stop should have two P's, S-T-O-P-P, proceed mindfully. You're going to proceed from tonight intentionally, mindfully, paying attention, focused on your own spiritual care and that of others. So, we got one more slide here, a couple. Anybody, I'm going to read this. I am only one, but still I am one. I cannot do everything, but still I can do something. And because I cannot do everything, I will not refuse to do something that I can do. Guess who said that? Helen Keller. Born deaf, born not able to hear, born not able to see, and yet she was able to engage with people on a depth of level that many people find absolutely amazing. She knew she was only one. She knew she couldn't do everything, but she knew she could do something. And what she did was amazing. So that brings us to the end. If you have any questions, you've got a minute and 15 seconds.
Yeah, that was a very wonderful and powerful module. And mind you, the presentation was made on 2024. This guy has had cancer with, stage 4B, prostate cancer. And in November of last year, he died. And during those days, he was so, intense. Clinicians, caregivers, and nurses, and all other medical people. He keeps on lecturing what can they do for people that are nearing death. Because he knows that he is about to die. And he died last November of this year. And you know how powerful he is, okay? And he might not be able to answer our questions because he's dead, but his work still remains there. And the thing that we do here is not only for the caregivers, even me, myself. This is my fifth time to listen to this video. I never stop because I know I keep on learning, especially the last quotation of the blind woman here. That's wonderful. Can you please go back to that, Jake, please? Sometimes we do not know what to do, but if you go there before the thing, the last quotation here means a lot to us. Sometimes you don't know what to do, but even a little things means a lot. That's why we caregivers, not only caregivers, but everyone who is helping people to get healed, helping people to prepare their lives, and helping people to get healed. I think this lecture serves us a lot. And as a church, this Community Alliance Gospel Church, this is the very first basic thing of how to equip you as caregivers. In line with Pastor Brett's ministry of outreach, evangelism and outreach, we want to equip, because this is our ministry outside of the church wall, right? We are ministering to people out there in the nursing homes, in the private homes. You see, that's still part of the church. That's why this is not only my credit to me. Because when I've done this, I've done all these, the data collection from you with answering those questions that we have given you. They are not only giving me a credit to become doctor, but also the church, because we have now a program to equip our caregivers. That is why we involve the church in this. I could have done this to our other church, but we want our church to do this because some of you are caregivers in this church, and we want to equip you to give you more power, not only the caregivers, but the nurses and some other medical people, because this is applicable to us. And we start this program this year as part of the pastoral program that we are going to empower the caregivers to be witnesses, to be the light of the world where you are, and try to integrate spirituality into your elderly care. And so this is the rationale of doing this. I do not just want you to attend, but I hope you get a lot of things. But one favor, please. Please accomplish the pre-evaluation of each module, the post-evaluation of the module, because that will mean your pastor's graduation or not. So please help me, because we will be gathering that data. In 2 months' time, we will also be making reports, and you will be the first one to do and receive that kind and read the 140 pages something of the dissertation of your pastor. And this is part of the last thing. So this is something like that. Again, if you want to do something out of the thing that you can do, try to do it wherever you are, in the best thing that you can do. Thank you very much for your indulgence. Please, please, please submit your pre-evaluation of the Module 1, Module 2, and Module 3. And also the post-evaluation. If you have not received anything, tell me. I'll email it to you. Email it back to me. That's the only thing I would ask of you. Nothing more. Please submit your evaluation through the forms that I have given you. If you have not received it, you give it to somebody, and then they will, if you don't know how to do it, the Ruba family will help you how to do it. Okay? The Ruba sisters will help you how to do it, so that you would be able to do it, because it's in the cell phone. Okay? So thank you very much for all the modules. Woo! You have no idea how happy I am in finishing this module. And this is not only me, but the church as well. Thank you very much. Yes, I want to say something. Yes, okay, good. We are a spiritual caregiver, all of us. And it happened. So thank you very much, Jake, for helping us in the audiovisual, and every one of you. Thank you for the... Now we still have food downstairs. Finish all the food there before you go. Okay? Good. Thank you. Thank you, my brothers and my sisters. The Lord bless you. Right. So, thanks. Thank you.